Good evening. I'm Ali Velshi filling in for Joy Reid. We begin tonight with post-Roe America. 1 year ago tomorrow, the Supreme Court ruled in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization that the right to an abortion is not constitutionally protected. The ruling overturned Roe v. Wade, the law of the land for 50 years, and remains as unpopular as ever. Yet the Republican Party insists on ignoring that memo. Today, major 2024 GOP contenders shared the stage at the Faith and Freedom Coalition conference to push extremely unpopular culture war issues, including more restrictions on abortion.
Thank God Almighty for the Dobbs decision. We are creating a culture of life in America.
I will cite a federal law to restrict abortion as well as President of the United States.
We must not rest and must not relent until we restore the sanctity of life to the center of American law in every state in this country.
This exact strategy to woo voters could very well backfire for Republicans. Check out this brand new NBC News poll. 61% of voters disapprove of Roe's overturn. That includes nearly 80% of women voters between the age of 18 and 49. Even a third of Republican voters say they disapprove. Today, President Biden signed a wide-ranging executive order aimed at protecting and increasing access to contraception. The nation's leading reproductive rights groups, Emily's List, NARAL, Pro-Choice America, and Planned Parenthood Action Fund, announced their endorsements of the president, along with Vice President Harris for re-election in 2024. The nation's two top Democrats joined those organizations at a rally today.
You know what you stand for, you know what to fight for. We stand for the freedom of every American, including the freedom of every person, everywhere, to make decisions about their own body.
Make no mistake about it. If somehow Congress were to pass a national ban, I will veto it. The court got Roe right 50 years ago, and I believe Congress should restore the protections of Roe v. Wade once and for all.
Joining me now is Michelle Goldberg, New York Times columnist and MSNBC political analyst, and Wendy Davis, senior advisor of Planned Parenthood Texas Votes. Good evening to both of you. Thank you for being here to mark an anniversary none of us hoped we would be marking. But it is here, Michelle. Joe Biden says if Congress tries to pass a nationwide abortion ban, he'll veto it. But that's not the same as Congress passing protections for abortion, which didn't happen in the 50 years since abortion was protected in the Constitution.
Well, I mean, I think part of the problem is that Democrats and people who support reproductive rights for 50, Roe versus Wade, while it protected our rights, it also allowed us to believe that those rights were protected indefinitely. Kind of allowed a lot of people, although reproductive rights groups and feminists have been screaming that this is what the right wing intended to do, was planning to do, said they were going to do, until really it happened a year ago. A lot of people didn't take this seriously. And so there wasn't very much momentum, for example, for Obama to try to codify Roe versus Wade when he had a 60-vote Democratic majority in the Senate.
In fact, a year and a half ago, there were people saying that's not going to go away. Wendy Davis, you've seen this happen. You've seen this play before many times. But even at the beginning of this, Texas was at the cutting edge of reproductive restrictions. It happened across the South. There are now many states in this country that have widespread abortion restrictions. We're looking at states where abortion is banned or restricted across the country. However, in those instances, even in Republican states where there have been statewide opportunities for people to sound in on this, including recently in Wisconsin, people have said they don't want these restrictions. That's a separate question from whether or not you believe you want to have an abortion. The idea that you don't want women and their doctors criminalized for it seems widespread in America.
That's exactly right, because people have heard stories over and over and over again now about what the impact of these bans have meant for people who are trying to make very personal decisions for themselves, medical healthcare decisions, guided by the advice of their doctors, and the understanding that even though this may not be a choice that someone feels they would make for themselves, they understand what the impact to a violation of people's privacy has been.
Michelle, these various successes across the country, whether they be in statewide votes or in the midterm elections, this is the issue that may well have kept Democrats in the position that they're in right now and still in control of the Senate. What does this tell you a year in? The efforts to restrict abortion are going strong and stronger than ever and playing out on the national stage, and the efforts to restrict those restrictions is going strong as well.
Well, I think that opponents of Roe versus Wade often talked about restoring abortion to the democratic process. But in fact, what you find is that abortion bans really depend on minority rule. Democracy in most parts of America is the enemy of these bans. And so you see the anti-abortion movement trying to invalidate referendums or make referendums harder to pass. You see them, kind of gerrymandering states in a way that makes it harder for the people to express their will electorally. In state after state after state, abortion rights kind of almost always wins when it's an up or down question at the ballot box,
right,
irrespective of people's feelings about the Democratic and Republican Party. But the Republican Party is so captured by its anti-abortion base that it cannot respond to the wishes of the majority without threat, and still win primaries. And so we're kind of being ruled by a minority of a minority.
And in fact, Wendy, you hear less about these nationwide bans in Congress because there are many Republican members of Congress who know this isn't going to wash where they're from. You certainly hear much less about it in the Senate. Lindsey Graham had floated this idea of a 15-week ban some time ago, and Mitch McConnell, I don't even think, acknowledged that he said it. This idea of a congressionally imposed federal ban on abortion is wildly unpopular, and I think a lot of Republicans understand would cost them control of the House and guarantee them not to get control of the Senate the next time around.
That's exactly right. And that's why you heard President Biden today lay down that marker that he would veto a national ban. He wants to make sure that people across this country understand that that's the stakes, that it's not just states across the country where these bans have been put in place, which is about 22 states now that have full or partial bans, but that this may be coming to a state that you live in, even if you feel like you're not impacted right now. And I believe that they are going to continue to press that point. Obviously, Vice President Harris on the campaign trail already talking very strongly about their support for access to safe, legal abortion care in this country and the alternative that people in Congress offer, which is not only not to put a ban in place, but instead to codify the protections that Roe v. Wade once provided to all of us.
But where does that go, Michelle? Because there have been members of Congress, there's been a bill introduced in every Congress for as long as I can remember to codify actual abortion protections. I think you brought this up a little while ago. This is tricky. People didn't think abortion rights were at risk, so they didn't think that pushing for the protection of abortion rights on the federal level was a necessity. Now, where does this go?
Well, I think that we're a long way from being able to pass abortion, to codify Roe at the federal level. You would need a kind of veto-proof majority in the Senate, as well as a Democratic House and a Democratic president. But let's remember that the campaign to make abortion illegal in much of this country was a 50-year project. And so,
right,
hopefully it won't take 50 years, but there is a very long project ahead of us to undo what Republicans have done, which requires, I think, careful attention to all levels of government. It requires a much greater investment in the state house. It requires sustained attention to judicial appointments, which Democrats traditionally have not been as good at as Republicans. And then it requires Democratic control at the federal level.